Well, we're here early today. Have I got the joke for you? What do you call a male sheep that wants to become a designer? Dieter Rams. So funny. All right, let's get started. Hello and welcome to Design Career Network. Today we're having Nick Finck, the founder of design ops agency Craft and Rigor. And before I go into what Nick does, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Design Career Network. We're an experience design channel. We teach designers how to enhance their careers and get that UX job. I'm Andy Galper and I'm your host. I'm a growth UX designer and a content strategist. I'm also a producer. And I also run Cascade SF, which is an experience design organization based out of San Francisco. During the daytime, I work with some of the biggest companies in tech, including Adobe, Google, and more. And I also advise startups and work with companies to help them grow and succeed. Now, I'd like to bring you our guest for today, which is Nick Finck. Hello, Nick. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Happy to be
Yay!
on the show.
Thank you for being here. I'm honored. I'm like, wait, should we go here? Or is this better for eye level? There we go. No. Learning. So Nick comes from a film, right? You come from a film background.
Originally film and video. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know the importance. I'm like, should I go down here? So we have the same eye level. Anyway, so Nick advises businesses on design operations for his company called Craft and Rigor. And he gives advice on design team organizational structure, hiring processes, and tries to help companies improve productivity for design and research by streamlining their workflow and review process. And Nick has also been led design at Facebook and Amazon and also co-founded agencies. And he's here to teach you everything he knows about forming a design organization. Actually, maybe just a little bit that he knows, and then you can ask questions after. So we'll start off with Nick will kick off a presentation. And after that, I'll come in and we'll do a live Q&A via YouTube chat, ask all the questions, and we'll try and answer everything as much as we can. So, well, Nick will, but I'll be here to help. I'll be here to support. So let me hide myself and get out of the way. And like I said, may the force be with you. But wait, that's copywritten, so I might get kicked off YouTube. Hold on.
Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for joining this session. This is a talk that I've given once before in Medellin, Colombia. It's called A Path for Tomorrow. And I'm going to talk about one aspect of something I'm seeing come up with design teams. And as we're scaling, as we're growing, as we're seeing organizations mature with design, there's some gaps and some issues that I've seen come up. Real quick, just about me, I already kind of mentioned, I run a company called Craft and Rigor. I do a lot of mentoring, coaching. I also advise businesses on how to grow their design teams, how to build L&D programs, how to define leveling for their designers. And I also do group coaching for design teams as well. So that's just kind of a little bit about me. This is a great sketch note I got from the last time I presented this. So if you're wondering, that's from Medellin, and it was a great presentation. We'll cover it right here. So let's start with one of the biggest gaps that I see in our field when we're talking about growing design teams and building a real well-rounded team. And that's just this notion that basically we have designers coming in that we're hiring into roles, and most companies tend to be hiring senior designers, and there's a lot of theories behind why that is. It's we need to hit the ground running. We need somebody who has a lot of skills they can bring to the table, and can kind of run very much independently. A lot of those are actually myths. Nobody really hits the ground running, right? Like, you still need to ramp up on the product space, still need to ramp up on the company and what it does, its mission. You need to get to meet people, and sort of work cross functionally between all the different organizations. And that goes for management staff in design as well as individual contributors. One of the biggest gaps I see with careers in user experience on teams, or going into teams, is this notion of years of experience. Years of experience is something that we see a lot in job postings. It's a sort of a requirement for the job often, and it's something that we use to sort of evaluate whether the person coming in is of sort of the right fit for the role we're trying to hire for. Unfortunately, it's a myth. Years of experience doesn't actually equate to skill set. So let me dive into that a little bit deeper. I did a ton of research going into this presentation, and to learn about what people thought of different levels of user experience. And the folks that had the biggest challenge with the whole years of experience benchmark, of course, is those new to the industry. 0 years of experience. No years of experience going in to get the first job, an entry level job, right? I describe these as junior level designers. So when I did an evaluation across those in the industry and those leading design teams, hiring for design teams, and what they described as a junior designer, and in terms of years of experience. And what we saw was something like this. So you can see 80% for 0+ years of experience. So expectations for designers in the field are about spot on with these people are coming in from whether a university, a boot camp, self-taught, any kind of method of how they learned to do the design, coming in with 0 years of experience, maybe a little bit more. Okay, and you can see there's kind of pretty big drop off to 2+ years. Now, what was interesting is when I looked at job postings and I evaluated a whole suite of job postings for UX designer entry-level roles and junior-level roles, this is kind of what we saw. So you can see here, there was sort of this notion that they have to have 1+ years of experience for these jobs. And 0 years of experience was only 8%. So what this means is, well, if you're doing the math, there's a little bit of complication here. What happens to somebody who graduates that doesn't have any years of experience and is trying to get an entry-level role? Where do these 1 to 2 to 5 years that I've seen come from? Do they just fabricate them? Maybe they work freelance. There's all these theories, but nobody really has a good answer for it. And I'm going to kind of walk us through a couple of things that will lead us to that answer. Now, if we look at expectations for senior level designers, again, across people in design leadership, hiring managers, etc., this is sort of what we see. So the expectation is about 5 years of experience. Now, I'm going to take a second to kind of jump back here. So if you were kind of wondering, with those job postings, look at this. We have the 3 years of experience, 4 years, 5%, 2% of the job postings that we saw were saying that people with entry level or junior level experience need to have like about 5 years under their belt. That, in the industry terms, when you talk to designers, is actually what a senior designer is. So putting junior titles on senior roles, I'm not sure why that happens, but it does happen. And part of this is, educating our recruiters and our HR teams about what should be the expectations. And again, I don't think years of experience is a good metric. It's definitely not going to measure skill or quality of work. It's not a good qualifier. You could have somebody who's been in an industry for 20+ years, who's really not a good designer. You could have somebody who's not been in an industry at all and is actually a good designer. The quality of work doesn't equate to years of experience. The only thing years of experience helps with the field of design is in terms of life experiences, having gone through a pivot, having gone through a reorg, things like that, which do help for the job, but aren't necessarily a skill that's like learned through that and may not have been. You could be basically at it for 20 years and not having done a reorg if you're in a small organization, right? So in my opinion, years of experience as a metric pretty much needs to die, a painful, awful death. Okay. And we need to kind of move on from this as the metric of evaluating what an entry level or junior level designer is. But the bigger problem, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the deeper, bigger problem here, the elephant in the room, so to speak. So when we look at this from a high level, we're seeing things like when we talk about like product level product design. And designers that work inside organizations that are focused on product specific. And we see about one entry level job posting for every 29 senior postings. For UX or UI, using the terminology UX / UI is kind of a faux pas anyway. But when we look at that, because a lot of postings are out there like that, we see there's one for every 19 senior level positions. Okay. So the positions aren't out there, right? They're not posted. They're maybe on blogs. They're maybe done through communications through meetups of just people who they know in their network and referrals, etc. It's kind of all this sort of backdoor way to get into the field as an entry level designer, rather than a well-rounded team, which would be a good percentage of junior designers or entry-level designers, as well as a good percentage of senior designers and some mids in between. So let's talk about that, mids and senior and what that all means. So when we talk about leveling and paths, it's usually like, is somebody performing at the next level? What does the next step for somebody who wants to get to the next step look like? And this is all done through like annual reviews and evaluation and setting expectations for each level. Factors for retentions for employee engagement and satisfaction, which is kind of interesting. When I went and did some of the research on this is kind of what we came up with, is having a formalized career progression ladder. Okay, so that basically means what is the expectation of the next role and what do I need to do to get there? And it's not just a matter of a checkbox, right? Like you could say, okay, you have to do these 5 things. It's not just so much like, hey, just checking off these 5 things and there you are. Now you're getting this promotion. It's a little bit more than that. You have to kind of really look at and evaluate from an objective level. Have you been doing those things in your role, and have you been sort of operating at the next level? What we call lagging promotions, which is very common, and especially in big tech. Not that I agree with it, but that's kind of what's out there. So then having separate paths for individual contributors and managers. So what this means is separate path, a separate career path for somebody who's a designer versus somebody who's a manager of designers or a manager of managers, okay, or possibly a manager of directors. So that means basically that as a designer, you don't just get promoted into management. You don't, go to mid to senior and then into management. It is a separate parallel track. Why is it a separate track? Well, the skill set of being a manager is very different than the skill set of being a great designer. Some people want to continue to do design throughout their careers, like theoretically all the way until they retire, right? Well, if you're in that camp, you're probably looking at the IC ladder, the individual contributor ladder, right? And that's important to acknowledge, because if you take the manager track, say you are great with working with people and somebody wants to kind of move you into management, you're going to find that doing the design is kind of a distant past thing for you. The farther you get into management, the less design you do. Okay. So that's something that has been shown as one of the big factors for retention, for employee engagement and satisfaction. Another one is career progression models focused on competencies that are covered a spectrum of people, process, and product knowledge. So, for example, it's not just a matter of, hey, we're hiring designers, right? It's, hey, we're hiring designers. We also have content strategists. We also have user experience researchers. And we also have, developers that do user experience design in terms of prototypes, right? Those are kind of separate sort of competencies that one person can have all that skill set for sure. But as you formalize the organization, you really want to have separate sort of tracks for each of those, because what it looks like to be a successful, what's called a design technologist, or somebody who could do development for prototypes for UX, but isn't like a back-end engineer or, so to speak, coder, right? Somebody in that role, success looks very different than what success looks like for a designer who's executing flows and behaviors within inside the systems, right? And then finally is design leadership at the executive level. So this is something that's dramatically lacking from our industry across the board right now. Very rarely can you go into an organization and look them up and find somebody in design leadership at the executive level. I'm not talking about a director of design. I'm not even talking about a VP of design. I'm talking about a chief officer of design, or a chief creative officer, or chief user experience officer, or chief experience officer, something like that, right? This is at the C-suite level, right? Most organizations don't have somebody that's sort of operating at that level. A lot of organizations either treat design as sort of an aspect of marketing, an aspect of product, an aspect of product teams, or an ancillary aspect that product teams utilize, right? And what we need to start looking at for a design to be really fully mature within an organization, and to really get at what the sort of original promise of design was, is we need to have a top level leadership inside organizations, and looking at design as something completely separate from just shipping product, right? A lot of the jobs are focused on that right now, and that's where it's at. So if you're trying to get a job in the field, yeah, you're probably going to be working on a team as like a product designer, shipping and delivering product. However, longer term, we need to start looking at design from this standpoint of looking at it as a completely different aspect that's separate from just shipping product. Now, that could be part of it, but when we look at high level strategy for design and what makes a truly compelling experience, we're no longer talking about just like creating features and shipping them, right? We're really talking about really understanding our users, really understanding the business, really understanding the drivers of both, and the requirements and needs, the OKRs, and designing for that kind of a model. It takes like a high level strategy kind of perspective. So that's why design at executive leadership level is really critical. Typical career path looks something like this. Junior, mid, senior, principal, senior principal. Now, people could argue this and they could say, well, at my organization, we have this other thing called lead or whatever. Lead is like a very big can of worms, so I'm not going to cover it here. When we look at the management path, it looks something like this. The reason why I'm kind of showing these side by side is to kind of look at how they kind of progress, okay? So a lot of people believe that a senior level, a manager level role is more senior than a senior designer. And it actually is not really the case. When you look at both the financial incentivization for that role, as well as the benefits and perks along with it, it's very comparable to a senior. In fact, you may have senior designers who are actually getting higher pay than just a standard manager. You get to senior manager, starts looking a little bit more like principal, etc. That said, again, not really hiring junior designers. So when we take that out of the equation, what happens with the work? Well, so when we think about a junior designer, they're doing stuff that is, easily kind of given guidance for work that needs to be a lot of work that needs to be chewed on, right? And so we kind of give them guidance, give them direction, show them how to kind of do the task, kind of pair up with them, maybe give them a little bit of mentoring, and then they're on the way to be able to do those kinds of things, right? And again, a lot of them are coming, even with 0 years of experience, are coming into the role with some level of understanding of how to do that work. Unfortunately, if we're not hiring the juniors, then the mids are basically what's getting the kind of brunt of that work, as well as the seniors. So in a lot of organizations, senior designers are basically doing tasks that could have been delegated to a junior designer. I don't mean just delegate, like throw it over the fence and let them go and take care of it. I mean growing the junior designer to get them more skilled so that they could kind of move up to mid and then eventually become senior, etc. Right? So a good senior designer, part of their skill set would be to elevate those around them, to grow others, right? The unfortunate problem is right now, a lot of that burden of growth falls on the management level. And again, we have managers that are in sort of that player coach role where they're both ICs and managers at the same time, which means they're basically split attention between on a given day doing management stuff and doing stuff that's like delivering design or overseeing design, which means usually they favor one or the other. They either are really good at design, so they kind of favor that. The management tasks kind of go on the back burner. You end up with this player coach that is sort of failing at one thing or another at some point in time, right? And it's not really a good way, a healthy way to run an organization. So then, with the player coach in mind, then the seniors, if the management is absent, right? If they're focused, the manager is focused on delivering, then the senior now has to kind of basically do things that are essentially management tasks, right? And that's pulling them away from doing the design tasks, let alone that we don't have those junior designers. So now they're doing all that junior design work. So then the other issue is a lot of the mids, they've been in the field for a while, right? So then they're getting promoted into senior. So now we have everybody at senior. There's no juniors because we're not hiring juniors. We never did, right? I mean, just hypothetically here in a company. And since we haven't hired the juniors and we don't have the mids, basically we're hiring only seniors, we're not building kind of this backlog of people to get promoted into the role. Well, what happens when the seniors get promoted to principal? A lot of seniors don't even bother with getting promoted to principal. They go off and start their own company. They go off and start their own product company. They go off and start their own agency, right? Because they have a ton of experience, right? Maybe they make it to principal. There's few principals, even inside of large organizations. Like where I was at Amazon, when I started there, there was only like a few principals. Probably count them on one hand, right? And by the time I left there was like 2 handfuls of them, right? So it's not a very common role inside the organization, right? And so what this means is we're sort of cannibalizing our own senior designers by overwhelming them with tasks that really should be something that can be sort of at a level of like junior level or mid-level sort of tasks. Okay, so let's talk about the structure of the workforce. We have junior level individual contributors make up only 13% of the design field right now. Okay, and if we look at mid-level, they're only about 25%. Okay, and so senior level is the largest part of the workforce at 28%. Now you may be asking, like, where is the rest of it? Well, the rest of it is in management, right? Or it's spread across manager / senior designer, right? So the problem is kind of systemic. We're sort of cannibalizing our own, essentially, pipeline for building our organization. And it's not that like we need to have these roles just to have them. It's that we're growing, we're hiring more, our teams are bigger. We have more product teams, we have more engineers that we're hiring, more PMs that we're hiring. The organization is growing into a larger boat, so to speak, right? And what we're not doing is we're not backfilling our roles because there's nobody to backfill. Right now, the highest on demand or highest demand job right now is a senior UX designer. And the senior UX designer is rare, right? Because they're mostly employed. So that means we're just basically poaching them from one company, pulling them into another company. It's kind of like a game of musical chairs, and everybody's bringing chairs to the game every time they show up, right? And fewer people are playing. So we have a ton of chairs and nobody moving around. So nobody, it's basically like these senior roles will sit empty. I've actually seen this at companies where they have a need for a senior designer, and that seat sits empty for over a year because they can't find the talent, because they can't poach. You're not going to be able to compete against somebody like Google on price point, right? You're not going to be able to award a senior designer more money than what the top, big tech is paying. So how are you going to find those people? Well, normally it would be look for more of a mid-level person or somebody on the bridge of going towards senior and hire them. But those people, again, have got promoted already, right? So now they're senior. And now they're doing, their own thing, or they're still at the company and they're pretty sound with their job, right? So it's really hard to kind of get those people out of those companies. And again, there's more and more companies and the teams are bigger and bigger. So the demand is more and more, but we're not supplying the demand with a pipeline of new talent, right? So currently, the demand of senior UX designers exceeds the actual available pool of candidates by far. Okay, and this is an old quote, so you can imagine it's probably even worse than it sounds here. Okay, now let's talk about gates and keys. Let's talk about what it takes to get into the role and what kind of some of the challenges are that we see when people are hiring, when people are applying for roles. Um, this is kind of goes back to how do you get the job in the modern day, right? Um, right now, a lot of organizations are hiring from universities. They have what's called university recruiting, and they find talent there, and they have partnerships with those universities, which is great, and they get good talent from that. However, it's not really representative of our entire industry, is it? Right? Not everybody has the ability to go to a formal university to get that degree, to get those roles, right? And so what we're looking at is kind of this sort of we're feeding the pond with the same kind of folks, right? Which you can imagine that doesn't really support that sort of whole diversity initiative we're looking for, right? So you're starting to see some companies that are looking for new routes to sort of hire through boot camps or through basically removing requirements about having to have a degree for the role. And you're looking at people who are searching for candidates that might be self-taught, right? And we as an industry need to kind of think about how do we pave those ramps to allow more folks to come in, to not just be a conduit for universities, but for boot camps, and also for individuals that are self-taught, folks that can kind of sort of show that they have the ability and growth and passion to kind of get into the role and learn a lot. But that means building environments that foster that learning, right? It means building L&D programs. It means building mentorship internally, right? So there's a lot of gaps there, as you can imagine, right? Right now, a lot of the people that are trying to get into the field see barriers. They see like, oh, well, that job history isn't good enough for this role, right? Like say they did graphic design, whether it counts towards their years of experience or not. To me, that's foundational knowledge and design. That should count for something, right? Oh, these projects are not mobile focused and we're a mobile focused company. So they see a lot of barriers. They run into a lot of walls trying to get into the role. And meanwhile, the seat, again, is left empty, right? So those that are putting up these barriers are saying like, well, in order to be a UX designer or to be a product designer, or you need to kind of jump through these hoops. You need to be doing this. You need to learn how to code. You need to learn how to manage people. You need to think about the business. All these things are just more and more barriers in the job posting, right? I even saw one this morning that said for a sort of a designer kind of role, they were like looking for C++ experience, right? It's like, why is that in there? And it's just, again, another barrier they're throwing up to say, you have to kind of jump this high in order to get this job. These are what I call gatekeepers, right? Basically, they're people who are afraid of new talent coming in and maybe possibly outperforming them. And let me tell you, junior designers can outperform senior designers. I've witnessed it firsthand, okay? So if you give them the right tools and the right mentoring, a good manager, a good coach, and help them, along their way of gaining knowledge and trying and testing and practicing, you'll see them outperform a lot of the folks that are in the industry that have kind of done things, the tried and true. This is, they're dogmatic in their approach, right? So we need to kind of check that. We need to kind of say, hey, this isn't right. Hey, we shouldn't be looking at years of experience for entry-level position. Hey, maybe we need to remove the requirement for hiring only those that have a degree in these sort of fields. Hey, maybe we need to look at other markets. Maybe we need to look at other universities even. And that helps kind of build the kind of truly organization and team truly representative of our industry and the diversity and the uniqueness of our industry, right? And I feel like that's what's really going to help us be amazing together, right? I think that's what's really going to help us get insight that we otherwise wouldn't have, right? So let's talk a little bit deeper about diversity and inclusion. Okay. So I got this great quote from Shelley about diversity and inclusion from Forbes. It's diversity is an action, inclusivity is cultural, and belonging is a feeling. Okay. And it doesn't start from the top down, it has to start at every level, from the bottom up, top down, at the management level, at the director level, at the IC level, everywhere, right? It needs to be something owned across organization, much like we talk about how UX needs to be owned across organization, right? And when we look at diversity, it shouldn't be just a metric that we're trying to hit and incentivization and goals to meet that metric. It should be much deeper than that, right? So it's not just a feel good move, it's good for business. So when we talk about creative teams, when we have diversity, when we have kind of opinions that are different than ours, when we have perspectives that are different than ours, it only helps us think bigger, think broader, get a better understanding of how to design something that's going to sort of succeed in the world, not just from our own perspective and our own world that we live in, right? If we live on the West Coast in the Bay Area, we have a very limited perspective, right? Versus if we have traveled abroad, we might have a little bit more perspective on how the rest of the world works, right? So building products and services that can support folks from all over the world rather than just somebody who has super high bandwidth, right? Somebody who looks this way, talks this way, thinks this way. I'm going to use a quote from Dan Mall, who said something along these lines, right? If we are hiring in the field of or if we're continuing to hire in how we're hiring today, and we hire from universities and the kind of Ivy League schools and tech schools that we've already been hiring from, and here's the thing. They're gonna, if they think like us, look like us, and are like us, then we're basically just hearing ourselves talk, right? But if they don't, having a diverse sort of, in this quote, it seems a little bit out of perspective. He's actually talking about hiring where it's diverse, right? So you're hiring somebody who doesn't look like us, doesn't think like us, is not like us, adding a different perspective to things. He says that's a great thing. So I highly recommend you read Dan Mall if you haven't checked him out already. So that will foster more creativity. More diverse teams foster more creativity. And I don't mean just like creative solutions for solving problems. I mean creative approaches to things, creative thinking about some product or service and how it operates in the world at large, right? Let's talk about mentoring and apprenticeships. That's another bridge into a role, right? And mentoring usually being external, apprenticeship sort of being on the job, right? Here's a quote that I posted recently on social media about retention. So it costs a business roughly 140% of annual salary of a senior designer each time a senior designer leaves. Think about that for a second. So anytime a senior designer leaves, you are basically spending 110% of that annual salary to replace them. And that goes for the recruiters that have to, field the candidates as they come in, the recruiting coordinators that organize the schedule, the recruiting sourcers that go and find the talent, the hiring managers that do the informals and the interviews, the design team that get involved in interviews. And that's just purely on the headcount level. There are so many other factors that come into play here, right? It's a very expensive thing to lose talent, especially seasoned talent that's already ramped up on your product, that already knows your business, that already knows all the leadership, knows the cross-functional organization and collaborates well with them, right? So you want to keep those people, right? One of the factors for somebody, the differentiating factor for somebody sticking around at a company is has been around drive and passion for the craft, right? That's kind of just almost a given, right? But also a growth mindset and learning from failure, right? This is what makes people successful in their industry and what makes them successful in their roles. Patience and persistence, right? And they need to be somewhat self-sufficient, right? So these are the differentiating factors for somebody kind of sticking around and retaining talent, right? If we look at this a little bit from the standpoint of what a senior designer might experience, right? They need to have a growth mindset even at the senior level. Look, I've been in this thing for 25 years myself, and I'm learning something new every day. Literally something major and new every single day about what I do, what design is, how to think about different things in design, and what's going on in the industry as of today. Not just in the world of a pandemic, but much more deeper than that in terms of design and how design is thought about inside organizations. So, in order to kind of support folks that are successful, because again, they would have met all these criteria if they're successful in an organization. So, think about your top talent, your senior designers who you would just like, you'd be just heartbroken if they left, right? And then think about how to best foster that. And one of the things is building a safe environment where there's sort of freedom to make mistakes. And this goes for the senior level to try things that are more ambitious. When I talk to a series of design leaders across multiple organizations across the world about when they felt they really like was sort of like a milestone in their career that they went from kind of just going forward in their career to like really succeeding in their career. And these were like highly successful design leaders. Like if you could think of a very highly successful design leader, I probably interviewed him for this. One of the things they said was the time that was sort of the tipping point for them to go from good at their job to being really successful was when they decided to do something that scared the holy living crap out of them. When they decided to make a decision or tell the CEO no or stand up for what design meant, they totally thought they were going to lose their jobs. Most of those folks like went home that night. They told me these stories. They'd go home that night. They'd lose sleep. They couldn't. They were afraid to go into work. They thought they were going to get totally terminated because of what they stood for or stood up for, or what they said, or where they said no, or where they said yes. It was interesting because they said they went back into work and then they found out that all of a sudden, no, they weren't going to get fired. And actually, what they said and stood up for was the right thing. The organization started understanding the importance of these things, right? So you have to, at a leadership level, you have to basically be in this mode where you feel like I could say this and it's not going to get me fired. And I mean, like, hey, no, CEO, we're not going to just launch another product to solve this problem. What we need to do is get back to the root of like where our problem is, or our current product is deficient, right? And help improve those things and kind of push back on things, right? And if they feel like they can say things like that in an organization that generally doesn't necessarily treat design as sort of a top level thing, as more of an ancillary thing in a lot of organizations, you see success through that, right? The interesting thing is this safe space to fail applies not just to seniors, but of course, junior designers, right? Yes, they're going to come in, they're going to make mistakes, but they have to have a safe space for them to be able to do that, to be able to make those mistakes. And it's not the making the mistakes that's the interesting part. It's the learning from those mistakes, right? What do they learn from it? So they need to have a good mentor, a good coach, or somebody available to kind of help them see, yeah, you totally made a mistake here, but this is how you succeeded through that, right? You learned something. You learned about, hey, this isn't going to work, or hey, this approach might not be the best idea, and here's why, right? But without making a stand, without kind of putting it all on the line, so to speak, you're not really going to see that at top level leadership, but you might see it at more junior level leadership or junior level designers. Um, so yes, it's true. Designers that are at a junior or entry level require a little bit more support, right? They require a little bit more guidance, but that's okay, right? Because guess what? If you, in most big tech organizations, they have leveling guides, like I mentioned earlier, right? If you look at the leveling guides and look at the expectations for what does it really say to be a senior designer, or much less a principal designer, right? And what does that really mean? And what are the aspects of that? You're going to find somewhere in there, there's kind of a people aspect. And somewhere in there, it's going to say grow others, essentially, right? summarized version, right? And guess what? So senior level designers, hey, good thing you hired all them, because guess what? Their job is to support the junior level designers. It's not just all on the manager, right? It requires like a village to raise a child. You heard that phrase? Okay. Well, it requires a team of senior designers to grow a junior designer. Doesn't mean that everybody has to be super hands-on with them and spend every waking minute. It just means you might need to pair a junior designer with a senior designer and watch the senior designer build skills to work with people, to grow and educate people, to help bring them on board with vision, design vision, etc., and other things. That helps build that sort of people management skill. Those people could then transition into the management track, or they could start moving towards principal level, right? And that's just good for the senior designer. Okay. So here's a great quote from Kim Goodwin about mentoring. If it's not already baked into the job expectations, it needs to be. Okay. You need to build a system where your senior designers, part of their job should be to help teach your craft to the next generation, so to speak. Right. And I don't mean that just by an age standpoint. I mean it by a job level standpoint. Right. We talked about mids going away because they're getting promoted to seniors and nobody's hiring juniors. So there's a huge gap. That gap is caught up with us, right? And if we don't start doing this, we're going to find that gap is going to grow even more. And pretty soon, it's going to be very rare to find any designers at senior level that are willing to work inside an organization that isn't building that opportunity for growth for them to be able to grow others, right? Then again, here's the kicker. In some companies, it already is part of the expectations. I worked on leveling guides for a number of different companies, and it's baked in. Not just because I, baked it in where I saw a gap, but also it was, in a lot of cases, it was already baked in. It might have been worded a little bit differently, but it was talking about growing those junior designers, building that sort of pipeline of talent coming in that could be grown into eventually one day senior designers. So think of it this way: if we talk about the pond being empty because we've been fishing all the junior or all the senior designers out of it, we need to restock the pond. The way to do that is through this, by growing senior designers through mentorship and coaching, providing L&D opportunities, and hiring them, having the recs open to hire them. And I know a lot of hiring managers are saying, wait a second, you're telling me give up a senior level headcount, my sort of allocated budget, basically, to hire a senior level designer and give up one of those to hire a junior level designer. Well, first off, your junior level designer is not going to cost you the price of a senior level designer. Second off, if you're thinking about, like, say, production work, let's just say you have to update 100 wireframes of some new thing because a new partnership was formed with inside the company, and you have to update a bunch of stuff. Do you really feel that the senior designer at their rate that you're paying them, their salary, is the best person to be updating those things? Absolutely not. This is why we have junior and mid-level designers, is to have them take on tasks like this. This is not the only task. We don't just give them the grunt work. We give them interesting ideas, give them projects and things to be inspired and to do something unique, things that are both sort of tending to existing products as well as exploring new product spaces. But again, your senior level designers should be thinking strategically. If you're an organization where you don't feel your senior level designers are thinking strategically, take a step back and look at how much work are they doing? First off, are they stretched too thin? I.e., you need to hire, right? Two, what are the kind of things they're spending a lot of their time on? And even if it's just 25% of their time is done on production level stuff, that 20% moved off their plate is 20% spent on strategy, higher level thinking, more strategic visioning for a product, more creative direction, etc. Right? So that's just something I want you to think about when you're building out your organization. Instead of looking at it from a senior level, just hire senior designers, look at it from hire designers at all levels, hire designers at entry levels, build a mentoring program, build an apprenticeship if you have the ability. Usually it's easiest in agencies, but it can be done in-house. Build internships, hire interns, right? An internship shouldn't be just a role that you hire for that goes away after a period of time. It should be somebody that you hope to convert one day to an entry-level designer at your organization. So make sure you have that allocated headcount that way. And I think you'll find that your organization will grow and thrive on this ability to learn and grow. And pretty soon you'll start to see the dogmatic ways go away and the kind of growth mindset and kind of looking at everything from a new perspective start to emerge, and ideas start to bubble up. And ideas can come from anybody, including the junior designer. The best junior designer I ever hired came in as an intern, got promoted to junior, and basically ran circles around my senior designers. They were outperforming them by far. And today I look back at him, and he's now leading a design organization as a manager. So everybody has the ability to do the role and succeed in the career. You just got to give them the opportunity. And right now, we're not giving people the opportunity. All right, that is my talk. I will step off my soapbox in order to take some questions here. But thank you, everybody.
I don't think you could hear me. Oh, I was saying thank you, Nick. Okay, we gotta do kudos. So we started this maybe like a month and a half ago, where everybody gives their emoji claps. So like, and then we show them on the screen. Yeah, it's Nick Appreciation Day. Here we go. Yeah, great content. Thank you. That's a lot. I remember you said that's a lot to take in. It is a lot of information, but I feel like it's so important. It's like, one of the things that myself as a senior designer / somebody who tries and mentor, like I put together mentor programs. By the way, Nick also is like very active in the design community. He was running, was it UX Seattle or?
Yes.
UX Seattle, and like throwing conferences and events, and he's just like very passionate about educating designers on how to level up in their careers. So I highly suggest that you follow Nick on Twitter at Nick F if you haven't found him yet. Here, wait, you get more. Yeah. Is the deck available? Will the deck be available?
Yeah, I'm going to put it on speaker deck, and I can share it out over Twitter. So you could get that link just straight in.
Oh, yeah.
But you can also, if you just search for me on speaker deck, Nick Finck, I'm pretty sure you'll find my page of all my old talks and all that kind of stuff in there, as well as this one will be posted in there too.
Awesome. Well, I was saying also, I'll put them in the show notes. I'll link to it on the YouTube /design career network. Yes, the only place to learn about design. Not. Anyway, I was saying that for myself as somebody who is a senior designer who works on, various teams, maybe like a startup. I'm trying to help somebody build out their team, and I want to train people. Yet I feel like maybe that I might not have a place to grow. How does like a manager, somebody above me, or how do I find a way to grow myself as a manager if I'm spending my resources educating somebody at a lower, I don't want to say at a lower level, but like a less experienced designer?
Yeah. So, I mean, one, you should always have opportunity to grow inside the organization. There should not be any kind of like glass ceiling that you hit. I know it does exist, though. Glass ceilings do exist.
Oh, sorry.
And I know that there's like this notion of, well, you could get promoted up until this level, and then at this level, you need to have the PhD to move further. Like, for example, in some research roles at some organizations. It's important to like ask those questions when you're interviewing, right? When you're in the role, though, and you're looking to grow, one of the things is to lean on your manager for that kind of support to build mentoring sort of programs internally. Also just even new hires. Like, is a new hire just kind of like, here's your desk, have at it, or is there a little bit of like guidance and somebody they could go to that's not just their manager? So I found like having like the buddy system, where every new hire had somebody that was sort of like their go-to person. It could have been somebody at their same experience level that just has been there longer. It could be somebody at a more senior level. It could be another manager. But basically somebody to go to basically ask any questions as they're kind of ramping up at the company. And then also a good manager will have kind of sort of an onboarding program where it's like, hey, here's your ramp, here's what it looks like. I want you to meet with these people. I'm going to set up meetings with them, etc. Because as a new hire, you're not going to necessarily know. As somebody who's been at the company for a while, it's important that you look for opportunities for the organization to grow. Nothing really, to me, says this person is invested in their role than somebody putting the effort to say, hey, you know what? We don't have an internship program here, and I think it would be a good idea, and I'm happy to help with that. And that might not be your full-time job, of course. It might just be a fraction of the time you're spending. And that's how a lot of the programs that I've worked on have come around. Is somebody on the team, like I'll go back to, I would say like Stephen Newman at Ubermind, who said, I think we should have an internship program, and he helped define it, right? And I basically empowered him and said, hey, you know what? I'm delegating this to you. You're going to build this program. You're going to like create like how you think it should be run. And we're going to go through and review it and then kind of explore how we can sort of launch it into the wild. And from there, our program grew, right? And it gave him an opportunity to kind of do something other than just, working on one product after another kind of thing, and one, feature at a time or whatever it might be, right? It kind of broke up the sort of workflow of the monotony of his job, right? So I've seen also in other organizations where they build kind of what I would call like peer networks for the same level. So if you're a senior designer, there's kind of like senior level designers at our company, and so like you might be in a pocket of designers over here, and there's a pocket of designers way over here. Those senior level designers all come together. Then maybe they do lunch, whatever it is, and they kind of build this sort of like community amongst each other, and to kind of get a better understanding of what senior design, what it looks like to be a senior designer at the organization. Even though you have the leveling guide and whatever the expectations are and all that kind of stuff, it really gives you a good idea. And because you're seeing them ask about things and talk about what they're working on and all this kind of stuff, and they're sharing it, and it's just a casual conversation, right? There's no expectations, there's no judgment, there's no nothing, right? And it's just a safe space, right? And that can be done not just at the senior level, but principal level. It can be done at the manager level. It can be done at the entry level, new hire level. A number of different ways to dice it. And by providing those spaces, it kind of gives a sounding board. Like, hey, this is what's going on inside of my organization. This is the challenge I'm running into, and now I could share it with a network of people that are basically in other parts of the organization, that are running into the same thing. Now, if you don't have a giant design team like that, then you have to start looking externally. You have to look at external communities like Design Network, and things like that, to bounce ideas off of, to hear, discuss, and whatnot. So joining Slacks, joining forums and communities, mailing lists, any kind of like environment where you could kind of connect with a bunch of people and share a bunch of ideas. Generally speaking, those are not fully public social spaces, i.e. Twitter, because those kind of conversations are, you can't really share like what's going down at your company on Twitter publicly, right?
You shouldn't, at least, right?
Yeah, you should probably have like a more secure network of people that you trust and that kind of stuff. And there's kind of like, rules of the community, should be posted somewhere, like, hey, don't share anything that's posted in here, etc. And I'm in probably about 5 different design leadership Slacks on just that alone, right? And they all have kind of their sort of guidelines around that sort of thing.
That's awesome.
Outside of that,
I was going to ask you another question, but here, go on. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, then outside of that, I was just going to say, actually having internal mentor is great. And they don't have to be in design. Like if you're a manager and you're trying to get mentoring for being a manager, you could go to another manager that's not inside the design organization if you have a small organization or one that is. And then coaching and mentoring externally. And the reason why I suggest specifically coaching and mentoring externally is because you're basically reaching out to an external person that has created a safe space for you to have conversations that could be, not something that you could necessarily share with your manager, like, hey, I'm looking to leave and here's my frustrations, etc. It gives you a place to vent. It gives you a place to share stuff and not feel like there's going to be judgment on you. Because when you do internal mentoring, it's different. They're an employee. They may share some of that, internally, right? And then it'll come up in your review or whatever. Hey, this person said they weren't happy, blah blah blah, And instead, like, have that coach sort of relationship externally, so it could be a safe space. And if those coaches are doing like what they call contracts with these companies, and they're coaching a lot of designers inside of that organization, they can surface anonymous themes, meaning of the 20 design managers that I'm coaching externally, there was this interesting theme that came up, and hey, design leadership, executive leadership at this company, here's these themes that you probably need to consider and think about, because every single one of your managers has said this, and then it's really eye-opening for them, and it's not revealing like who said it or what individuals or what percentage or any of that kind of stuff. It's just like, here's some information that you might want to think about, and then meanwhile the coaching and growing from that level is happening externally.
Okay, we have a question. Awesome. I feel like I'm listening to a podcast. It's like I'm like fully immersed in like learning about putting together teams. Hi, Nick. How do you get the C-level suite? How do you get CEOs, C-suite to understand the design team is more than just a service org? What kind of company do you work? Well, getting budget is challenge compared to dev and product groups, but isn't product part of design? No.
So
I wonder what kind of company you work for.
The phrase product can mean different things, and I always ask people to clarify, but it could mean, product, and basically meaning anything that falls under the chief product officer and down. It could mean product, like product management, which I always push back on product managers to say, please say product management, because when you say product, it's confusing to a lot of people. But it's kind of it's tech lingo, right? It's not particularly helpful. So that said, when we look at design as a service, that's just kind of a Band-Aid on a problem, right? That's just kind of like, hey, projects are going to come at us. We're going to become like an internal agency that pulls in a project and we kind of crank some design out and spit it out, sort of thing. And that's all fine and great at some level, because I think there is a need, especially even in large organizations, for that kind of a service. However, when you look at more mature design organizations, they treat design at the very least as a peer to product management and a peer to engineering, and so coding. And it's sort of like this three-legged stool, right? What's interesting is, having mentored and coached a lot of people, sometimes I hear them talk about how their organizations presented to them when they interviewed or whatever it was, and they might have a three-legged stool, but like it's marketing, product management, and engineering, and design is nowhere to be found on it. It's like, okay, so that's a red flag, right? When you're already in an organization that is operating that way, you have to basically lead by example. The other thing is not just leading by example and showing impact and results, but you have to kind of look at, well, who is it that's pushing back on this? It's really easy to say executives or leadership or whatever, but like, go and find out like who are your allies and who are people that are kind of saying chief officer of no to you, right? And figure out like what is it that they feel is problematic with the approach of looking at design as something more than a service organization, as more of a partner in launching products. And you could even use external models. But here's the thing. If the organization isn't willing to change, if they're dogmatic and they've kind of always been operating this way, and believe me, I've been in those organizations that it's just like, this is how they run the business, and design is treated this way. These changes are cultural changes, and they happen at the slowest pace ever. To give you an example, some of the cultural changes that I did with inside of one particular large tech organization I worked for, it basically took me 2 years to establish kind of a different direction, i.e. like, let's set the boat sailing this direction. And it was probably another 2 years after I had left before I started seeing any results of that. So here's the thing. The average lifespan of a designer inside an organization is anywhere between 1 and 3 years, maybe 4 tops, right? And there are some people that will be at a company that's what I call lifers, which are like there for 10 years, but they're when you look at the majority of the industry, it's not the norm, right? And there's nothing wrong with being at a company for 10 years, just to be clear. But if your lifespan is like a year, and one organization I actually ran into was less than 6 months, so they didn't even wait for their first annual review before they left. So if you're trying to change culture, but your organization is changing every so many weeks, months, whatever you want to call it, you're not going to get too far, right? So if you're leaning on your designers to make the change, it's not going to happen. It needs to happen more at the leadership level, where you start to see people who are at the company for 5-10 years on average, and then the occasional lifer, right? And at that level, those are the people that have more influence, right? And what you need to build is rapport with those folks, rapport with them to trust and respect their craft, and for them to trust and respect your craft. So treat them like a peer mentor. Go on, like I used to do this, go on walks in the park with them. Like, I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but like, just get to know them, right? In this post-pandemic world, of course, but get to know them, get to understand what their challenges are. What don't they like about design? What do they have issues with in terms of how design is operating today? And it might shed a little bit of light on why there's so much pushback. But just know that this is a very slow changing process. You can't just go into a meeting, say something, get some influence, and then walk out of the meeting and tomorrow everything's changed, right? It's going to be a very slow process, and you have to embrace that by building relationships, which take time, right?
Build relationships, gain trust, and somehow like influence them, educate them with numbers, and show them the dynamic impact of design. I think all of your points are really valid, especially with the fact that when you're working at a large organization, like Peter says, a 3K global company, that's a big company. That's going to take a long time to because like everything has like a very focused process, and then unless they like, if you want immediate change, maybe go work at a startup, I don't know, or find another company that actually cares about design.
You vote with your feet, right?
Yeah. Okay, so just to shift gears a little bit, Nick, you mentioned that hire junior designers, hire designers who have different skill sets. I'm going to add on to this question. Besides just how does a junior designer get experience? Do you freelance? And the other question is, how do you find the right junior designer? What kind of qualities do you look for in their work to know that they'd be a good fit?
Yeah. So first off, how does one get junior experience as a junior designer? Ideally, there's apprenticeship programs that you can get that experience. Ideally, there's university recruiting and recruiting efforts that go beyond just universities, that you can kind of get in the door as like an intern or something at kind of the ground level, so to speak, and then you grow into the role, right? Another way to do it is by contracting. There's a number of companies that basically hire contractors for legally limited set of time, and they will do what I would essentially call staff augmentation, where they basically place them at that company. So like, here in Seattle, there's a contracting company, and you could get a job at, say, Expedia or something, and then they'll basically place you at Expedia, and you're all intents and purposes, you're on the team, you're just like everybody else who's working there, you're getting experience through that. They're a little more lenient on what sort of the bar is to pass to get a contracting role, as long as basically the client has bought into, that person, then cool, then you're in, right? When you're in, right? And then the idea is to do the best you can, and really showcase your experience showcase your skills. And it's not to kind of like overperform and like try to like do everything, but just like do your job really well, do it effectively, make sure you test it and check it, make sure it's like clean, and there's no like just common mistakes, misspellings, pixels off, whatever, all the little superfluous stuff that really shouldn't matter can matter in terms of you converting from a contractor to a permanent. Okay. In addition to that, getting experience as a contractor, there's, like you mentioned, opportunity to do freelance, but it's a lot harder. But there are a lot of companies out there that can't pay a seasoned freelancer, so they're willing to like they only have the budget to pay a lot less, and you're new, so you could probably offer a discounted rate, kind of thing. Be careful with that, because know that like if you get into the business of freelancing professionally and it goes like as your career goes, you need to kind of up your rates, right, to meet where you're at with your experience. That said, I wouldn't like do things for free for companies. The only time I would ever imagine doing any kind of work like that would be if it was a verified nonprofit, licensed with the government kind of nonprofit, and a good cause, and something I just would have volunteered, jumped on the bus, and gone and done without, like kind of thing, right? If you're willing to volunteer and it's a good cause and it's not a company, it's not a for-profit or even not for-profit, but literally non-profit. And there's ways to look up the legal explanation of what that means. But then, okay, you could do a project for this pet adoption company that's really cool and really into pets, and this is like a nice thing you want to do. It looks great on your portfolio, all that kind of stuff, right? But ultimately, it's going to come down to that portfolio. What's on it? And we could talk about whether a portfolio is a gatekeeping mechanism. I think it is in a lot of ways, but it is up to the employer to kind of decide, like, how do we evaluate talent? How do we know like somebody who doesn't have any experience is worth it? And that goes back to the second part of the question, which is like, what makes, how do we know we're hiring a good junior designer, right? And I think it is around, they have a growth mindset, meaning they don't know it all, and they definitely don't know it all. They're willing to share that, right? They're, sort of like that sense of humility, like, I'm totally going to come in here and learn, like, versus like, oh yeah, no, I totally know how to do that. It's like a very different attitude, right? So going into it with honesty, and going into it with a growth mindset that I'm going to learn, I'm going to try some things, I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to learn from those mistakes. So you have to have that, to be a good junior candidate. Okay. There needs to be that hunger there. And I've tweeted on social media, and I'm trying to recall my full list of it, but that was one of them in there. It's like a bullet point of a series of things. But I think the other thing is somebody that would be a good junior candidate is somebody who knows why they want to be a designer. Like, not just like, I want to be a designer because I want to make a lot of money and I heard it paid a lot, or I heard that there's a lot of demand for designers and I want to be in the industry, and previously I was in some other industry, there's not a lot. Fine, that's whatever. That doesn't mean like you're the great, junior designer I should hire. What tells me more is, look, let me tell you a story about when I was a kid and I did something that was kind of design related, and that really inspired me, and I started doing this stuff after that, and that really got me into all this, and I started learning about UX, and then this is kind of how I basically built my understanding of where I'm at today. It's like, oh man, this person like really caught on to something, and it was like personal, it was emotional, it was something that like, they truly are, you could tell they're truly vested in their career. Versus like, I don't know why I want to work at this company. I don't know why I want to do design. I just know it pays well. Like, doesn't resonate. You would never say that in an interview, but the way you answer questions, if you're in that boat, the way you answer questions in an interview is going to reveal that. The hiring manager is going to ask things, and it's going to sort of reveal that, whether directly or indirectly, right? And yeah, maybe the hiring manager makes some assumptions about things that it should just directly ask you. But it's not often that you'll hear a candidate go, yeah, I really just want better pay, and that's a noble cause, and I totally understand that, and it's not like I would say no to somebody because of that, but it's just, I need to see that this is why they're here, this is what's important to them. Maybe it's, helping people use products around the world, making a difference in the world by making products easier, which is very cliche to say, but could be the reason that's driving them. I find things that connect to what I'm doing as a company to be more powerful. So like if you're interviewing, for example, at AWS versus the rest of Amazon, tell me why. Why AWS? What do you know about AWS? It shouldn't be like, oh, I really want to come and work here because I really like the Kindle Fire and I love Amazon Fresh. It's like, cool. Those are not in our department. Those are nowhere near where we're at, right? So why AWS? And they can't say, they never use the product.
Like
You're
do
going to
research
probably
on
do
the
less.
company. Yeah.
Yeah, do
Okay.
research on the company, but have a good reason for why that company.
Yep. Awesome. I'm like, okay, next question. Nick, are there resources you would suggest for senior levels to develop the people skills to become a great coach? And then, thank you for asking that, Christoph. Literally took the thought out of my head. So apparently, yeah, I love these show and hide. Anyway, by the way, great answer on the junior designer. I just want to make sure everybody gets their questions answered today. So, Christoph.
So to answer this question, what do you suggest for a senior level to develop people skills to be a great coach? So I'm going to infer the word coach here means to basically be able to lead and grow people rather than coach formal, like I'm going to go and coach a bunch of designers externally as a business, which is what I do. Because there are coaches of coaches, if that makes sense. Just kind of like how if you ever had like Scrum training or Agile training, there's coaches of Agile trainers. They train other trainers. So there's that. I'll put that aside. I think you're talking about growing people and being basically a good senior designer to junior and mid-level designers. One, it just takes practice, right? Just like anything you did in design to get into design, it just takes a lot of doing it before you start to get good at it, right? So that's just as a baseline, right? The other thing is quite honestly, if you're doing like what I consider essentially management or people management, or you could describe it as leadership is another way to describe it, and basically leading mid and junior level folks, in order to be really good at that, you need to have somebody to bounce ideas off of, somebody that you can talk to that's doing that really effectively. And that could be, like I mentioned earlier, somebody outside the design team or on the design team that's effectively a great leader. Maybe they're not a manager. Maybe you're in an IC role because you said senior level. So I assume IC. So if you're a senior level IC and you're trying to grow others, look for other people inside the organization, in your team or beyond. It doesn't have to be inside of design, could be outside of it, that are doing that effectively, and basically build a peer mentorship relationship. So start having coffees with them or virtual coffees, whatever you want to call it, and start having that conversation and ask them, hey, I want to like meet on a regular basis to kind of like run ideas past you and hear your thoughts because I think you're really great at this and I want to learn how to be great like you are. And that's all it takes is just that internal relationship, right? Now you can do this externally with different coaches. There are coaches that do what I call leadership coaching as well. And you kind of have to be careful because there are leadership coaches that are from your discipline of design, and there are leadership coaches that have never done design in their life. Each has their place, right? And they're not going to tell you like do A, B, and C, and boom, you're done, kind of thing. They're going to ask a lot of questions. They're closer to a therapist. They're going to be like, well, okay, so you did this and this happened, and you're trying to help this person with this. Do you think, have you explored this thing, or can you consider that? They might kind of like get you to sort of ask questions and get you to kind of think about how you're operating with somebody, and kind of figure out like what might be a good strategy based on it. So you're going to answer your own question. They're just going to ask questions that lead you to that answer. The answer is something you already probably know deep down in, and they're just going to help you surface it, right? So that's coaching, leadership coaching as a whole. And then if you have somebody that's a leadership coach that happens to be somebody who is in research or somebody who is in design, all the better, because now they know your craft and now they can help you through some of those things that you run into that are unique to the craft. I can recommend folks like that if that's what you're looking for. I also do coaching, but not so much on the leadership level, more on the individual contributor level. and in coaching with businesses as well.
I think also like these are, yeah, it's I love like leading people, learning how to lead people and grow people. So much of that is like communication and learning how to give feedback the right way and how to inspire people and like and make them feel like welcome and be, it's like it's a lot has to do with like how you treat them as an employee and how you like make them feel included. But I feel like a lot of it is also just you're going to learn from being around good managers, right? And being around people who actually people who can guide you, or you can listen to Tony Robbins. No, I don't know. I grew up with business tapes, so I'm like, say the word. It's like never say
no.
True,
yeah, surrounding yourself with people that you like want to be influenced by, rather than surrounding yourself with people that like maybe you butt heads with a lot or has a very different view of the world than you. And it's okay if it's like different, but like, just like I try to surround myself with like very genuine people, and it's helped me a lot because they're willing to share stuff, right? They're willing to say, hey, Nick, like in a private chat, hey, Nick, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, cool, I get this. So it really matters who you surround yourself with. You want to be a good manager, surround yourself with good managers. You want to be a good leader, surround yourself with good leaders, right?
Yeah. So like surround yourself, and it also will change how you feel, because when you're around people that are positive and happy and all that. Okay, so I think that was it. I don't think we have any more questions as of right now, but I'm sure that, we still have plenty to learn from you, Nick. So we hope to have you back again in the future. And we really appreciate you coming out today for Design Career Network's Get That UX Job. Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. And one more time, give it a round of applause. We need oh no, now we got to reverse the song. So Nick had the final countdown prepared for everybody to watch as his intro, and then we couldn't stream it because it might cause my YouTube channel to go down because of copyright infringement. So we'll have to make up a song similar to that and then use it next time. So I'll write a new song. There we go. We got claps. Thank you. Okay, and just so you all know, tonight I'm giving the kudos here.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
folks here
thank
too,
you.
also.
Oh, what a great! I like that photo, Marco. That's a cool picture. Like cool lighting. So good. Thank you, Nick. Great advice. Okay. Thank you all for coming out. So just to remind everybody, tonight we still have our regular stream at 5:30 p.m. Tonight we have Magali Green. She's a LinkedIn recruiter. She's a design recruiter for LinkedIn, and she'll actually be talking about how to optimize your LinkedIn profile to get noticed and to really, what to include, what to avoid. And you can ask her questions. Same exact format. Starts at 5:30 p.m. tonight. And I will have to update my designcareer.org website, but we do have Matt May from Adobe talking about a career in accessibility, who actually Nick used to work with at an agency they started a while back. And then we also have Peck from Impeccable. And Peck will talk about how to start a design agency and decide whether or not you want to start a design agency. So we have quite a bit coming. We have a couple different really awesome designers / mentors giving talks. And if any of you would like to participate, please email me andi@cascadesf.com. Still use my Cascade SF email because, I don't know. It's just the one. But I also have designcareer.org, Andy@designcareer.org, ANDI@designcareer.org. I'm looking for somebody to talk about possibly like whiteboarding exercises, maybe AR, VR. I got a couple recommendations about 3D designers recently from Kate. Thank you. And also we're looking for some diversity here. So no more white males. No, after next week. No.
I'll give you a list. I got a great list of. Yeah.
Awesome. And we'll see y'all soon. See you at 5:30 tonight. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you, Andy.
Thank you.